things have improved a lot. There are specific networking avenues, but it can't be just a women-only thing. Or how do we get an equal seat at the table? I was told at one of the industry organizations which I was a part of, the big ones, and I would tell them that I'm in part of the committee, I attend the meetings, but I see a lot of decisions were taken and I wasn't even there. I was at the meeting. When were these decisions taken? Obviously, behind closed doors after the official meeting was
Bangalore's
taken.
also got a very strong culture of wrestling monies, known as the Garadi
I
money.
know personally of people who come, foreigners who have come here and invested and who want to start their business, they find it enormously difficult even to open a bank account.
Hello and welcome to the show. How I would like to start this before starting your own company, which we will come to. Where else you work?
Oh, I started as a trainee and I was with Deccan Herald for 6 years. And then I was freelancing as a columnist and a contributor for Times of India, the Hindustan Times, Time Magazine, several of those. And I joined a magazine called Sunday that was published by Anand Bazar Patrika. And when I was working for them, I also started doing some television journalism because they had a television wing. Then I quit and I became an entrepreneur for the first time. I had my own consultancy. So it was doing everything creative in media, things like that. That was the time I also handled PR for Miss World when they had the Miss World pageant here in Bangalore. Then I was having a big problem finding clients who would pay me. We would do the work and they wouldn't pay. So I didn't have quite a great experience. So I went back to work. And this time I joined Indian Institute of Management as visiting faculty. I was there for some time, but then I felt I wanted to join journalism again. So I joined Midday. I was there with them for another 6 years, but I felt that I had done everything that I could with them. So I started my own company.
So, what exactly this Raintree Media does today?
I would say it's a knowledge company because whatever we do, it's all to perpetuate knowledge and to share knowledge and to communicate with people, to connect people. I came up with a tagline that many people liked a lot. I was calling it creating an informed community. So it's not just news in the sense of just giving out facts or creating and working, connecting all these people who actually not just thinkers or also doers. We publish books on our own and we also publish books for others. And we also just write books with others and have them published with other publishers. So they're all books. Books are our main revenue. And people were all laughing and saying, why would anybody do books? Print is dead. Newspapers are dying. But books never died.
But, starting career so early, which is like almost 25, 30 years ago. And today, if you look back, of course, 30 years ago, there was no digital media, I could say that. And today, everybody watches, reads everything digitally. Is it true that the print media is dying?
No, if you look at it, book sales have gone up. You go to any bookstore, you'll see more people there than ever before. And booksellers are very happy. The number of authors are around. Everybody wants to write a book. You just need someone, they have a story to share. It's not enough just to put on a blog or share on LinkedIn. Everybody wants to do a book. How good the book is debatable, but that hunger is there. And I mean, if someone guides them, they can do the best version of the book that they can probably do.
We also have Aditya Mendons hanging in here with us, who also happens to be your business partner and your son. Aditya, welcome to the show.
Hi, Santosh. Nice to see you here.
And briefly tell us what exactly you do and how you are connected to media.
I have random conversations every day, anywhere. And one of the things that I've learned from both my parents is that it all begins with the conversation. So I basically the COO and Brian's try to just
The media of 90s and media of 2025, how would you describe in one sentence?
See, one of the reasons that my husband and I both left mainstream journalism was it was already taking a turn for the worse. It was completely controlled by the big media houses, which had other vested interests in with the other industries. We were very idealistic, like most people in journalism those days, talking about how we want to change the world or things like that. But then we realized we're all being used to some extent. I mean, any boss would use the employee, but then we felt that if you look at the value systems, you're not being supported by the system to do the job that you want to do the way you were told initially. You can make an impact on the world and change it. And if you're going to be just a pawn in the big system, we said we don't want to be a pawn. We want to be the ones who are moving the pawns around. That is when we switched the side of the table. But we had never done MBAs or nobody had taught us. But I think that we had spent a lot of time interviewing a lot of big people who are running very successful companies. And so in a way that itself became like a guidebook. Coming back specifically to the media, it's what I feel in many ways there is this kind of an adrenaline rush again is because of technology. Technology has enabled anyone. You have had this opportunity to bring out your own channel, your podcast, have your own thing. It is empowering. And you don't, earlier, you just had to read what somebody felt was right. And at the most, you could try to write a letter to the editor, which if they had space or if they liked it, they would publish it. Now, that you're there, the Xing, Xing them, and you're free to express your opinion. So that has empowered a lot of people. And okay, there are good and bad. Just because people can have an opinion doesn't mean they have to share it. Sometimes they can think about it. But at the same time, you're so much more connected to the whole world, isn't it? Earlier, by the time news filter down, even from Delhi to Bangalore, would take so long. And now, instantly, I mean, even that person hasn't even formed the next word in the sentence, and it's people are consuming it. So I think it's part of change that happens.
Absolutely. Samyak, you mentioned about writing and printing books, publishing books under Raintree Media. And then we have seen quite a few. One is Best of Bangalore, which you printed for many years. Can you briefly talk about those books?
Okay, those are a series of coffee table books, which I kind of call business atlases because they talk not just about the flora and fauna and culture of a place, also talk about the economy and the ecosystem, the top businesses, which are the sectors which are in, which are the homegrown success stories, which have been sustaining themselves and flourishing. So it's part of a international publishing network that we had the license to publish in India and Sri Lanka. So we did it for about 10 years. So we've done books about different cities. We've done about Bangalore, about Chennai, about Goa, one about India. Okay, so that, and we also did that Innovate book. There was another series called Innovate Bangalore. We focused on 100 innovators.
And the reason we are here today is your new project. Can you tell us about that particular project, what you had in mind, and how it is shaping up?
See, one of the things that I've been doing for the last few years is also co-writing people's autobiographies. So the success stories of businesses. So whereas in these books that we had written, like, chapters about each, an entire book about a company or a person, which I found was lacking in India at that point of time. A good racy book. The way people used to write would be basically very self-flattery thing or congratulatory thing if it was written by an external person. But I felt that the Americans were very good at it. By the time something is happening, they've already documented it. And I noticed that India lacks the excellent and very candid documentation. So that had been in the back of my mind when Dr. Sudarshan Maini, who's the late chairman of the Maini Group, and his son Chetan was the one who built India's first commercially viable electric car called Reva. So he was one of those people who kind of had a great literary connection, and you'd keep telling me on and off that when I write a book, you are the one who has to write it with me. So he called me one day and said, I'm ready to do the book now. Shall we do this book? And I said, fine. And it was very nice that he was so methodical. I liked the way he would come excellently prepared. He would not waste my time or his, and extremely courteous, old world charm. So then I realized that here was a person who found something that he felt somebody could tell his story. But he didn't want to control the whole narrative. I interviewed 30 people. There were people in UK, in US, in Turkey. Apart from going to his factory, he never wanted to sit in on the conversation, never wanted to know what I'm asking them. He felt that he could trust me to tell the story that I understood the way it had been built. And I felt that was a great challenge and an opportunity. And I told him it has to be in this way. So I did that, that got done. And sometime later, I was got busy with these, our own books, coffee table books. Then I did my second wonderful book was with Mr. T.T. Jagannathan, chairman of the TDK Prestige. When he was the speaker at a talk, this is one of the rare occasions I had missed attending it. So I met a friend of mine at some other event and she said, I didn't see you there. The speaker was so wonderful. Seems like such a fantastic story and I wish somebody can write a book about it. And I thought, why not? So I called them up and said, do you have a video of it? Please give me access to it. I saw it and I pitched to Penguin, created a format. And they said, we love it, but he should be part of the book. We want it in the first person, like how you did the previous book with Areva. So then I asked for an introduction to Mr. Jagannathan and I went and met him and he said, I don't know anything about writing a book. I know how to make cookers and other kitchen equipment. But if you feel the subject is interesting, I'm happy to give you my time.
So what was that a biography you wrote?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have been writing or co-writing with. Has it happened with you that you have written or contributed substantially, but your name was not found?
I reached out to you once when something like that was going to happen.
But that did not happen.
Yeah, that did not happen because they felt that there would be value if they have a seasoned writer's name on the cover. It would actually add value to it. So very often I make it a point in my contract to say I would like it. But sometimes it depends. Maybe I don't want my name. I'm building other writers. So sometimes it could be somebody else in my office, but who's not really reached that level, but I want to give them the exposure. So sometimes we don't insist on it.
Can you just take us through the entire journey of from your first conversation about that particular project of co-authoring a biography till the publication? The entire process, the time taken, and all those meetings, conversations, fights, and also the negotiations on the fees for one of your projects.
I like it best when it's just that person and me at that level. If it's the book done by the top person, then they talk to me one on one. It's very smooth. But sometimes, of course, they have hired people who are deputed to communicate, and then the message gets a little diluted and the time taken gets a little this thing. But then we do it. Most often, the biggest challenge I find with the top people is they are so busy. They really find it difficult to make time. But when they do make time, the time is put to great use. They come extremely well prepared to the meeting. Bring a cup. I always make it a point to mail them a recap of our conversation a couple of days before I'm supposed to meet them again. They Most of them have already prepared their notes. And Mr. Ashok Sutta, oh my God, he's a legend in time management. You At the end of that 1 hour, I may be meeting him in his own house. He'll only get up at 1 hour and go away. I was still wrapping up. He'll say, I told you 1 hour, out. He never believes in Dilly Dallying. So I've learned a lot from working with these people. Extremely well prepared. We do have differences sometimes, of course, because if I'm just going to sit and agree with everything, then they just need a stenographer or a typist. They don't need me. So we do have discussions.
Okay. Is there any particular book you would recommend to our listener or anybody who's watching this podcast?
I must say, Aditya is the one who got me interested in biographies first because as a student in the kind of environment that we were growing up then, all the biographies of great people were written so boringly. It would be a sheer punishment. Never thought one day I would be a biographer. But I remember when he was in high school, he had picked up two books that he would go around everywhere with. One was Richard Branson, biography. Oh, that man is such a wonderful writer. You feel you know him and the way he writes. The other one, he actually gave it to me just before I started writing the Reva book. And maybe he can,
Maverick,
yeah, Maverick.
the Brazilian.
Yeah, Ricardo Sandler. Oh, very beautifully done. It taught me so much about ethics of business and how you can run business in a different way. Those two are beautiful books I would recommend everybody to read.
Anybody from India?
There was one book uh, which I felt I would have liked to have met that person. It's actually, there's a very wonderful journalist and historian called Mr. S. Muttaya. He was a Sri Lankan. He had moved to Madras many, many years ago. So he had written a book about a gentleman called T.T. Vasu. He was the cousin or uncle of Mr. T.T. Jagannathan, the uncle, I think. I never met him. He had passed away before. I mean, the book was written after he passed away. The family had asked him to write it. So when I went to Madras to interview Mr. Muttaya for Mr. Jagannathan's book, he gave this book to me and he said, very few copies, so give it back to me. I read it on the way back, you know. Then I called him up and said, I'm sorry, I'm not returning this book to you. So that book was fantastic and I felt what a colorful and creative personality. I wish I could have known him.
Wonderful. Have you read Captain Gopinath's background?
Yes. What was the thing that you liked about Gobi's book?
How he came from such a humble background and his experience, the way he described as if I was taking that journey, and then his conversation with Malia, many conversation he described so much in detail, and how this probably he lost the vision or what he wanted to build. So something very inspiring. Another book I really like is Andre Lasse's biography, and if you're not read, you should read that one, and you should read Michael Dell's biography.
Yeah, both are very good.
Very good. So that was something different. Yeah, yeah. So that was a. If you have to approach somebody, and you said you don't make those cold calls, if there is somebody in India or in our valley or Karnataka on whose life you want to kind of write a book, who that person is.
Now we started a new series called For C-Suite Leaders. So everybody need not be the founder of that company or need not have, somehow been instrumental in it, but they're doing a great job in whatever part of the company they have headed or series of companies and how there's a story to be told even about them. And we are profiling people like that. They are not only autobiographies, they're also leadership stories. They also have stories to say. So we have started a series on them.
Yeah. Before he move on to the next topic, I'd like to ask a question. Career and job opportunities in this sector today for these youngsters, and also the business opportunities for the young entrepreneurs in media today. You would have been there for the last 30 years, whether it's a print, electronic, or digital media. What do you advise? Is there enough opportunities? What they should do?
See, one, I think the kind of exposure they're getting is far advanced. They might know more than the people who are teaching because they're digital natives, right? Almost. They know everything. Nobody needs to teach them anything and they just observe and they learn. So that also makes it very difficult for them to find a niche. But I think it's an evolving thing. It is difficult for media. It went through a bad spell. Everybody suffered. Even before COVID, they were suffering with not enough ads. So jobs are scarce. But I think there are many ways of doing media these days. It's not just one thing. So as content creators, very young people earning lots of money by doing these micro reels and things like that. So they have a story to tell. People's attention span are not big. They're empowered. And I think the established media also starts absorbing some of these.
Aditya?
We live in a 6-second economy. If your ad can't get my attention in 6 seconds,
Is only ads or any content?
Anything like earlier this year, I got the opportunity to co-host uh, a friend's book launch, and he said something that turned my vision around for the year and the years to come. He said Bangalore needs to have a Mumbai style edge for quality in production. Because in Bangalore, regardless of your age group, because of our nice weather, we're typically laid back, right? And the opportunities are phenomenal. The kind of topics and the kind of ads that, or the kind of agencies that reach out to me on a daily basis to talk about what I'm passionate about. And if you can use something as simple as GBT, you can create a side gig economy that outpowers your regular job. But it's amazing the tools that we have today.
Sunday, just pausing Aditya for a moment. Is it ethical to use AI, ChatGPT, and all these tools to generate your own content?
It is a question that we toss around every day. I think it all goes back to the time you started using a calculator. You started using technology to do your work. Say when you wrote the answer in your sheet, that calculator did it for me. So now from figures, it's evolved to words. I find it very annoying because even when I'm trying to send a message, it starts substituting words and it wants to constantly keep telling me things. I do use it, and I find technology very, very empowering in more than two actually. One is I use some aspects of the grammar correction thing, especially because sometimes, depending on the audience that I have to do like a universal change from UK to US. I can't keep doing everything. So we find that useful. Second thing is, uh, transcription has become much faster because we use the AI transcription tools compared to humans. Of course, a human needs to correct it. Words, context is not known, but it's an aid. It cannot substitute, it's an aid. I would always look at anything that technology creates as an aid, as a tool. Do I use it? I use things to organize information. For example, though we're very good at putting things in folders, sometimes I need something in a hurry and I can't find it. So I asked Gemini to say, find me the folder in which this interview is there. It'll tell me this is the folder it's there. Then I can go and read it. So I always use it as a tool.
Now, as Aditya talked about Bangalore, so let's talk about Bangalore. We talked a lot about media. Of course, you chronicled Bangalore's evolution for years. You said you were born in Bangalore, right? And from quiet garden city to retirement city to now innovation capital of India, the Silicon Valley of India. How do you see this city today compared to when you were born, you grew up here? In terms of its charm, in terms of everything.
There are two things that make me upset as well as makes me happy. One is right up till the early 90s, it was a very peaceful city. It was a walkable city. It was pedestrian friendly. But then there were not enough jobs. It's only people who are already pretty well off or they came from at least reasonably middle income families that had a life worth talking about, who could afford to even seeing a car was such a rare thing.
You know, about 80s?
Yeah, late 80s and right 90s. And I time it with the liberalization of India's economy, the growth of the IT sector, they're all interlinked. That's when it started booming and getting bigger and whatever. And now that I think, at what point did this city lose its identity? You cannot go to a place like Chennai and not speak Tamil. You need to know Tamil. Of course, now there are a lot more people who are not from just from Chennai, from other places working there. But people still the local culture, everything is so strongly celebrated. Same thing in other states like Kerala or in Andhra. Why did this city lose its cultural core? There is no soul. They're there in isolated pockets. But on the whole, it's like, whose is the city? Is it the city that belongs to people who have had no connection with Bangalore, who lived somewhere else, who were born somewhere else in India, who went away somewhere else. And when they decide to move back to India, decide they will come and live in Bangalore, not in their own hometowns. It doesn't belong to them because obviously they are contributing to the economy, they are paying taxes, they are creating jobs. Or does it belong to people like me who grown up here and who feel, where is this, how is this my city? I don't even listen to my mother tongue here. On a regular basis, until I call my family, I don't hear my language anywhere. So, I'm not saying it to find fault, but I'm just examining it, saying, how did this all happen? Is this all what all big cities go through? And it's a mix, Of course, it's wonderful to see the kind of energy that different thought process have brought in. But at the same time, I feel, look at the crumbling infrastructure. The new people are not to blame for us. It's our own leaders were to blame for us, who never planned properly, who allowed everybody to come without thinking how we going to give them access. Now, when there was this talk of all the people who are losing their H1 visa, B1 visas, and they'll have to come back here, and I was saying, and they create another city on the other side of the airport, and they need a visa to enter this side of Bangalore because our roads can't take anymore. There's no road at all. So I know people say, if you say anything negative, even Kiran Mazumdar was told, oh, you're bashing Pangui. She has every right to bash. She's not bashing. We are asking the powers that be, and not to do with any political party. There are so many political parties. They've all at their turn. Not one of them did anything. The only time we had decent roads was a brief period when our state was under governor's rule. And that time the governor went around in those 2-3 months and we had fantastic roads.
Interesting point you brought out is that compared to Chennai, Kerala, somehow Bangalore is using its identity. But do you think the essence of old Bangalore still survives beneath the tech-driven industry or ecosystem?
Yeah, it does survive. It survives in pockets. Maybe you don't see it in the cosmopolitan side of MG Road or something. But if you go just a little beyond in those lanes around Alsur, you'll see the Tamil population that had become a part of Bangalore from before independence time. If you go this side towards Gandhi Bazaar, you'll see all the native Kannadiga thing. You go that side to further down, Baswangudi, Jayanagar. It's a very, very different ethos. For me, it's like going home.
What is the first thing comes to your mind when you think of Bangalore, old Bangalore?
Trees, trees, beautiful. We used to feel so cold. We hardly ever had the fan on. And beautiful. We were able to sit under the shade of the trees. We used to have like midnight dinners that grandmothers would, make little balls of the food that they prepared and put it in everybody's hands. Where all the kids would be sitting in a circle and they would go around serving. That was the way. There was no food wastage. The family stayed together and we sat in the outdoors.
Aditya, do you agree?
I think Bangalore is that classic example of when we look at the American dream, look at how many people immigrating from different parts of the world.
But don't you think that this is a part of evolution? Every country has evolved and shapes, probably losing its old charm.
One idea that I had some time ago after visiting some of the European capitals was I found that every single day of the week, there is some cultural thing happening in the center of town where any visitor to the city or any this thing can just go and see, and it's a local thing. So I was thinking when they created this, below the boulevard, they've created this auditorium. So I felt that the government should, or the state tourism department Kannada culture, keep a nominal fee and make sure that every single day there is something happening which will celebrate the local culture, local tradition. And that's the easiest way to do. You can't force feed change. I can't force you say you have to like me, you have to like my language. I have to showcase my this thing in such a way that you want to be part of.
Yes. So an interesting example of that could be Kantara, right? If you see what Rishabh Shetty and his team and the entire people of Dakshin Karnataka has done with a very simple culture that has remained hidden for multiple years and generations. Because unless you were earlier part of Tudunadu culture, you would not be exposed to it. And in Bangalore is home to a lot of old culture. Just that people are not aware. We are caught up in our own lives. And for another thing, if you go to the Pete areas, Kavanpet, Chickpet, City Market, SP Road, Avenue Road, they're all lanes that combine together. In those areas, Bangalore is home to something called the Karga, right? Then Bangalore's also got a very strong culture of wrestling manes. They're known as the Gardi manes. And in Gardi manes, you don't need a cult, you don't need a gold gym, you don't need any of these things.
It's called akhada.
Akhada in North India, South India, in Karnataka, it's called Gardi Mane.
Okay. So moving on to the next topic, which is women in business and leadership, especially in Bangalore. The last conversation we had, it was on a very similar topic, and we tried to find women leaders in general from Bangalore, from Karnataka, and I think the number were very kind of limited. What do you think?
I think it's the same in India, from whatever I gather. Had I been an entrepreneur in the US, I would have got so much more support from the government. I would have had so much more tax benefits, which would have allowed me to invest more in my company. Here, I hardly get that. There are things available you can get as if you are a startup in the tech business or if you have a manufacturing thing, but we don't fit in either one, so we don't get anything. There are many like us who fall midway. More than anything, what I feel where women lack, one is apart from the government setup, is the kind of mentoring and the hand holding. Most of the places, for example, even your CII or FICC are the top one, they're all big boys club. And for years, men have been supporting others. They go for a drink, they play calls, and they all end up backslapping and supporting each other. Women run the family. They also have other responsibilities. And when they finish work, they're not going to go around glad handing people and spending all their time partying or networking. They have to go home and look after their families. So, where, of course, things have improved a lot. There are specific networking avenues, but it can't be just a women only thing or where, how do we get an equal seat at the table? I was told at one of the industry organizations which I was a part of, the big ones, and I would tell them that I'm in part of the committee, I attend the meetings, but I see a lot of decisions were taken and I wasn't even there. I was at the meeting. When were these decisions taken? Obviously, behind closed doors after the official meeting was taken. And then one of them told me, why don't you join our women's wing? Where all their wives were there. I said, no, I want to sit at the big boys' table. I don't want to be sitting along with your wives in the women's wing. If that's what the women's wing is, it should not be. It should be meant for career women. It's not for somebody's wife to sit. We're not in the army, right? Where if you are the general, the general's wife has an equivalent post in the whatever it is they call the army welfare association. It's not like that. It's a business establishment. But I do see things changing. There are a lot of micro networking things, a lot of incubators, and I think a lot of young women are extremely confident and extremely sure of what they want in life and how they're going about it. The change is happening. And I'm going to tell you of something that happened. I mean, the FKCCI is not as glamorous or all your FICI and CII, but the FKCCI has been around for more than 100 years. And the recent president is a woman who earned her spurs. She didn't get the job because she was the wife of somebody who was a big shot. In its 100-year-old history, the first woman president was elected. And that day she was elected, there are so many ancillary women's organizations. They outnumbered the FKCCI people who were there, would all come together to congratulate her. And I felt that sense of mentorship that was coming from that place. I felt that was great. I mean, she's committed to making it happen, and she acknowledged it in her speech that I did just get here on my own. All these men who are sitting on the dais, they helped me to get there, as did all these other women. So the change is going to happen. It's already happening.
So if we talk about those women leaders who have made it big, apart from Kiran Mazumdar Shah,
I know. Everybody here knows only her name.
and she has been there, for last I think couple of decades. After that, it is hard to find another leader. So you'd probably
We use the right word. She's a leader. She just didn't make her money and said, okay, now I made my money and I'm sitting on. She's there for all civic matters. She's there for many other things. She puts herself out in the open. She demanded and bought a seat at the big boys' table. There's no table without her.
Absolutely. But it's us who's to be blamed because our ecosystem is probably not promoting women entrepreneurship. You look at the unicorns from Bangalore. How many women are there in the founding team or in the management?
Some of them get co-opted in case they feel the optics don't look good or they can get some additional funding.
Right. Also, not to forget about the government initiatives. They are promoting women entrepreneurship. They are giving a lot of subsidies and incentives for the companies where a majority of the stakes are held by women. So government is promoting and then they're trying to do every possible thing to push these women ever come up the ladder. But probably it will take another decade or so.
I hope it will be faster than that because I think mostly about awareness. Most of them don't even know what to do. They have the talent, they don't know how to do it. If it can be channelized, there are a lot of them who are micro entrepreneurs, but how do they make it bigger?
Yes.
But that's not to discount that. What they're doing, some of them are serial entrepreneurs in their own right. You see it even in the self help groups in remote areas. They can't all be, big investors or big business people, but they're running many micro enterprises and they, from the kind of lives they used to lead to what they are now, it's fantastic. We had the chance to, chronicle their journeys also. We did another book for Sanjeevani, which is the self-help group program in Karnataka. Oh, wonderful, so energizing. You feel there is hope because we've seen this change happening. It's not just somebody talking hypothetically. Lives have changed beyond recognition.
Of course, if one message you had to give to those upcoming women who want to start, who want to take a lead, how they should go about it.
I think it's all up to them. I've seen people who have given this whole, what used to be known as cottage industries, doing the embroidery and knitting has become like all the rage again because people are into self care. And now with more people recognizing the value of handmade things, that's what people used to do. But that's on one hand. On the other hand, I think there is what about research facilities? People were just doing academics and research, they have a lot of opportunities too to scale up, to have their own little labs and businesses. It need not be so big, but there's a lot of opportunities opening up with the biotechnology parks available.
Right. Then let's talk about ease of doing business and entrepreneurship in our Bangalore. Uh, you from setting up their business for the first timers, what do you think has changed over the years?
See, I think the government puts a lot of high in just helping startups, especially the IT related and IT and ITs. There are people who lead a life outside of IT. I don't see life being any easier for them. All this single window thing and all that, I don't know. In practice, it's not as efficient. There's still miles to go. I know personally of people who come, foreigners who have come here and invested and who want to start their business. They find it enormously difficult even to open a bank account. How are they going to do their business? How are their clients going to pay them? How will they pay their employees? Even simple things like this remain after all these years.
Now, coming back to the topic, and one last question on this topic is that if we talk about the mindset shift, what mindset, have people had, let's say 20, 30 years ago when they wanted to set up a business in Bangalore and what that mindset has today? So, of course, the opportunities were less that time and today it's a plenty. But the Bangaloreans, are they entrepreneurial? What's your take?
I think now there's been a huge shift in the mindsets. Earlier, people were very happy to have salaried jobs, and if it's in a PSU, they're set for life. And I think that also, you know, narrow existences, they just wanted to have a comfortable or life to just to get through life. But now they're getting inspired. I think Bangaloreans are becoming bold and ambitious. They were always very clever. Now they have the entrepreneurial spirit too.
Before we wrap up, the last topic is the bigger picture: culture, creativity, and the future of Bangalore. What role do you see for creativity and culture in India's growth story when we talk about Bangalore? Where do you see a Bangalore in terms of these three lenses, to these three lenses in 10 years from now? Culture, creativity, and innovation.
We've already seen the biggest innovation of modern times in terms of Aadhaar, born in Bangalore. Okay. So
Do you really believe that?
yeah, Aadhaar was born in Bangalore. Because without Nandan Nilekani, it wouldn't have come about. Okay. Second thing, there are other scientific campuses, but I still think the campuses in Bangalore really are excellent.
You're talking about IIC?
IAC, we have the Triple ITV,
Bangalore
C
Bioinnovation
Vision
Center, IIC,
but those are doing fantastic work. It's
DRDO, HAL.
And then outside that, there's that new Science City, then agriculture, GKVK.
yeah, they even found a new stream. What was the one that the US said? I can't remember it, but they're doing amazing work. So, in terms of technological advancement, Bangalore can never be written off. Other people may come and lure Google campuses and all kinds of campuses to their states, but the people who really want to do serious work, they'll sit there and rule the world. And apart from that, but if you're talking about creativity, you already know that the most number of Gnanapeeth awardees have been in literature have been from Karnataka. And I think people are still doing pretty good work. I see a lot of very bold writing happening in Canada, and with the translations happening, you saw Banu Mushtaq's translation for Kannada work into English won the Booker Prize. Isn't that amazing? He had already written those stories in different things. They publish or put together a specific thing as a translation, and that won the Booker Prize. So creativity is ruling.
What about the cultures?
Well, you said it. We are a cosmopolitan thing. So probably if we talk about how more of people, I think they just need to stop isolating themselves in gated communities and living only in their little zones. Not all the youngsters. What do they call it?
Loneliness epidemic is here.
Yeah, so they can, if they can just come out and then feel the comfort. Basically, I think a lot of people find it discomforting to come out and meet the locals and hang around with them. And I think we Kannadigas should start talking to people with more openness and
No.
in Kannada. When we say talking Kannada, it need not be in a hostile way. We should, and even then, there should be a concerted effort. I think every company which hires people who come from outside, the first thing they should do as part of their introduction thing is to make them learn the Kannada language, make them learn the Kannada culture. It's not even going to cost them that much. That would be a great way for any company, any new startup, any new company, in the part of the induction process, if they can teach them Kannada and the state's food and the state's habits and culture is the best way to find acceptance, and it should be in all these very soft ways, not in very militant and aggressive ways.
How would you like to describe Bangalore or Bengaluru from 10 years from now? How would you like this Bangalore to develop in 2035? Like your Bangalore, which you can proudly say that, yes, this is how I wanted my city to be.
Oh, first thing, let me be able to go meet people without thinking I'm either going to be very early or very late. Let my traffic be increased. Traffic can only improve when the roads are good. We don't want tunnels. We don't want over bridges. Just fix the roads and the traffic will move. And then when I see people being able to go on metros, good. I hope if they advance it more, it will help. But I think even though the number of metros are growing, there are equal number of people on the road. So is there a way to handle it? I think we need a traffic expert to weigh in on that. But I think if the roads were better, traffic could at least move.
So you're saying more developed.
Yeah, more planned infrastructure. Right now, they're trying to fix something which was never planned. So, how about not allowing new things to come until they fix it? Let's not go and start digging tunnels until we fix the roads that need to be fixed.
So in 2035, developed Bangalore, happy Bangalore, clean Bangalore.
What I would want is to see more happy people on the road, not this pissed off and aggressive people only giving gullies. That can happen, like you said, if we can walk to most places, if the pavements are good and there are a lot of lovely, nice aroma from fresh air from the trees coming. Also, rows of air of parking where people can actually go take their cycles and walk to most places. That would be awesome. That would be a great city with happy, smiling, healthy people.
You remember about 14, 15 years ago when we used to go night cycling?
Yes, yes.
If that can come back, that's where I see our city.
Like so, of course, I have worked in quite a few cities and different states in India, and I have visited many countries. But I love about Bangalore, which kind of attracts people from different culture, different places, and it connects and binds them. And there's so much energy. There is so much love here in this city, and then we need to work towards maintaining it. Any city has certain challenges. Infrastructure is major for us. I hope it improves. Government is doing. We citizen had to work with them and make sure it improves. But more than that, we need to build an ecosystem where everybody, every stakeholder thrives, gets their dues. As you mentioned, happy faces, and happy faces is what matters ultimately. Thank you so much, Sandhya. It has been very interesting and insightful conversation, and thanks Adi as well. For you all those one-liners here and there, and all the interesting facts. It has been wonderful talking to you, Sandhya.
Thank you, Santosh. Pleasure meeting you as always.
Fascinating 2 hour conversation, or may probably take you on a good city tour or a Sapphire Sport tour of actual Bangalore.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.